The Yamasee War, which raged from 1715 to 1717, was one of the gravest challenges faced by early colonial America. It was a conflict where the English colony of South Carolina, then relatively young and fragile, came perilously close to destruction. The roots of the war ran deep, fueled by decades of exploitation, mismanagement, and economic greed that eroded trust between the colonists and the Native American tribes. By the time the conflict erupted in May 1715, tensions had reached a breaking point. Charleston, the colony's capital, modern-day Charleston, became a city under siege as desperate refugees poured in, fleeing a wave of violence that swept through the countryside. The attacks were relentless. Yamasee warriors allied with other tribes, such as the Lower Creek, launched raids across South Carolina, burning plantations, looting livestock, and killing settlers who failed to escape to Charlestown. Bands of hundreds of native warriors surrounded the city, effectively cutting it off from the countryside. Minister Francis LaJoie vividly described the situation. "The Indians that surround us on every side, but the sea, revolted from us by unanimous consent." This chilling observation underscored the scale and coordination of the uprising. What had been isolated skirmishes in the past now became a unified effort to drive the colonists out. Conditions within Charlestown quickly deteriorated. Overcrowding from the influx of refugees created a hotbed for disease, and food shortages worsened as supplies dwindled. The cries of women and children, fearful for their lives, reverberated through the streets. Governor Charles Craven admitted that the colonists were almost naked and defenseless, lamenting their inability to mount an effective defense. "We know not how soon some of us may be in the hands of those monsters, of mankind, the Indians," he wrote. Reverend Thomas Hassell took a more introspective view, interpreting the calamity as divine punishment for the colony's sins. Quoting Leviticus, he declared, "When ye are gathered together within your cities, I will send the pestilence among you, and they shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy." This catastrophe didn't have to happen. For much of its early history, South Carolina maintained relatively peaceful relations with neighboring Native American tribes. This was not due to altruism, but pragmatism. The tribes served as a buffer against European rivals, like the Spanish and French, as well as against hostile tribes further inland. Trade relationships were mutually beneficial, at least on the surface. The colonists provided European goods like firearms, powder, and metal tools, while the tribes traded deerskins, livestock, and other goods. However, lurking beneath this seemingly harmonious exchange was the burgeoning Indian slave trade. South Carolina's early economy was far from stable. Settled in 1670, the colony struggled in its formative years, unable to establish rice and indigo as cash crops until decades later. In the meantime, colonists relied heavily on deerskins, cattle, hogs, and, disturbingly, Native American slaves. The deerskin trade in particular was massive. Buckskins were so widely used that they eventually became a form of currency. The term bucks, still used today as slang for dollars, originated from this practice. While the etymology of bucks is a fascinating cultural footnote, it pales in comparison to the human cost of the Indian slave trade, which directly contributed to the Yamasee War. The Lords Proprietors, who governed the colony from England, officially prohibited the Indian slave trade, recognizing its potential to ignite conflict. However, enforcement was virtually non-existent. The wealthy elite in the colony, known as the Goose Creek Men, exploited this loophole. They incentivized tribes like the Yamasee to raid other native groups, capturing their people and selling them into slavery. In return, the Yamasee received valuable European goods, further entrenching their dependency on colonial trade. Initially, the Yamasee thrived under this arrangement. By the early 1700s, they had established 10 towns near Port Royal, South Carolina, with a combined population of around 1,300. But the system began to unravel as debts mounted. Colonial traders extended credit to the Yamasee and other tribes, allowing them to purchase goods on the promise of future payment. However, overhunting caused a sharp decline in the deer population, making it increasingly difficult for tribes to repay these debts. With deerskins by 1711, the Yamasee owed over 100,000 deerskins, more than the colony exported in an entire year. Desperate to recoup their losses, traders resorted to aggressive tactics. They threatened to enslave the families of debtors, further inflaming tensions for many tribes. The colony's 1715 census, which documented 28,000 Native Americans across 141 towns, compared to just 7,000 colonists, was the final straw. To Native leaders, this census appeared to be groundwork for widespread enslavement. Governor Craven attempted to ease tensions by sending Indian agent Thomas Narn and his rival John Wright to negotiate with the Yamasee at Pocotaligo. Unfortunately, the two men undermined each other. Narn promised peace, assuring the Yamasee that their debts would be addressed diplomatically and that their lands were not under threat. Wright, however, took a confrontational approach, insulting the Yamasee and questioning their loyalty. This schizophrenic policy, as historian William L. Ramsey called it, left the Yamasee confused and distrustful. The Yamasee deliberated through the night. By dawn they had made their decision. Painting their faces with streaks of red and black, symbols of war and death, they launched a ferocious assault. The Pocotaligo massacre marked the beginning of the war. Charles Raga, colonial merchant, described the scene at dawn. Their terrible war whoop was heard. Resembling devils come out of hell, they fired on everybody without distinction and put to death with torture in the most cruel manner in the world. Narn was among the first victims, tortured for days before succumbing to his injuries. That cheery excerpt is from a colonial merchant named Charles Rod, in a letter he wrote to his employer in London. It's one of the best primary sources on the topic. It details the initial attack, the Pocatello massacre, as well as the days to come. He goes on to explain that one man present at the attack, a Captain Burrows, escaped by swimming across a river, but was shot twice, quote, one of which pierced his neck and came out his mouth, and the other pierced his back and lodged in his chest without touching a vital spot, end quote. As the embassy worked to round up colonists near the town of Pocatello, Burrows, now a human snorkel, made his way to the nearby Port Royal to warn the town of attack. On word of Burrows, they start to evacuate. Some of the town didn't believe him, but most felt the bullet holes in his neck and back were convincing, as well as the gunshots and screams in the distance. The colonists couldn't scatter by roads. The settlers found themselves traversing through perilous Indian territory, prompting many to seek refuge near water. In a desperate bid for survival, hundreds crammed aboard a smuggler ship that had been secretly readied for defense. According to Rog, approximately 400 desperate individuals were received on the vessel. As darkness enveloped them, the threat materialized quickly. The Indians, finding the homes and plantations abandoned, descended upon the shoreline. Throughout the night, they unleashed a barrage of gunfire at the ship while emitting piercing war whoops, sounds that carried an eerie mix of defiance and triumph. Despite the chaos, remarkably, no one aboard was harmed. The devastation didn't end with the gunfire. By morning, the Indians targeted livestock, systematically slaughtering horses and cattle, looting valuables, and burning every structure they encountered. Their grotesque dances and jubilant cries amidst the flames painted a chilling picture. ROG remarked that under other circumstances, the sight might have been described as a macabre spectacle of victory, if not for the catastrophic impact it wrought on the settlers' lives. When the tide rose the following day, the colonists aboard the ship managed to sail out of the port, heading north toward Charlestown. Others, unwilling or unable to board the ship, took their chances, paddling through the sea islands in canoes, or braving the open ocean. Tragically, the plantations between Pocatello and Port Royal witnessed over 100 colonists either killed or captured in the chaos. One survivor's story stands out for its bizarre ingenuity. A man whose name remains lost to history evaded capture by hiding in a marsh. Stripping himself naked, he reasoned that this would make him resemble the Indians and decrease his chances of detection. Oddly enough, his gambit worked, proving that desperation sometimes spurs unorthodox but effective solutions. Among the grim fates of the captured was Thomas Narn, a well-known Indian agent. ROG recounts the gruesome details of his execution, writing that his captors loaded him with heavy pieces of wood, set them aflame, and left him to endure prolonged agony for several days before he succumbed. This horrifying method of torture reportedly claimed many victims and sowed terror among the colonists. Rumors of such ritualistic killings spread rapidly, pushing more settlers to flee to Charlestown. Before the massacre at Pocatalico, Governor Craven was already en route to the area with a militia force of 250 men. Unbeknownst to him, Narn, under duress, had divulged his movements to the Yamasee. Before his death, Yamasee scouts quickly spotted Craven's party, but delayed their attack until April 19th. In the ensuing skirmish, although the colonists were outnumbered, their structured approach gave them an edge. The militia suffered 20 casualties, but managed to kill several Yamasee leaders, forcing their opponents to retreat. One of the fallen Yamasee warriors carried a letter intended for Governor Craven, dictated by the Huspa King, a prominent Yamasee leader, and penned by a white captive. The letter offered a chilling explanation for the war's origins. It claimed that colonial threats to enslave the Yamasee and execute their leaders provoked their outrage. The letter further declared their intent to seize the colony and predicted the fall of its forts and settlements. While the detailed revelations of their strategy and numbers were tactically unwise, the underlying message, "We are coming for everything," was undeniably unsettling. The Yamasee uprising, however, was far from a solo endeavor. Other tribes, including the Lower Creek, Cherokee, and Catawba, weighed their grievances against the colonists. Motivations ranged from mounting debts and loss of hunting lands to fear of enslavement and mistreatment by traders. Over the following weeks, the back country erupted in violence, with 90 out of 100 traders in Indian villages killed and the survivors barely escaping. For many tribes, attacking the traders symbolized a rejection of colonial exploitation and a call for renegotiated relations. By May, Charlestown was flooded with refugees. Governor Craven's absence left the city vulnerable, but the Yamasee war parties never entered. They preferred to raid and plunder plantations, reducing the countryside to ashes. Supplies dwindled as food, livestock, and crops were destroyed. Aid from neighboring colonies was scarce and often conditional. Virginia, for instance, infamously offered help only if South Carolina provided enslaved women in exchange. Despite the chaos, the war's turning point came with Captain Chicken's ambush of a Catawba war party. Though outnumbered, his militia killed 40 warriors, compelling the Catawba to withdraw. This marked the beginning of the conflict's decline, though hostilities persisted for years. Some tribes, like the Cherokee, recalculated their alliances, while others, like the Yamasee, faced devastating losses by 1717. The war had effectively ended, leaving South Carolina battered but intact. The Yamasee, scapegoated as the primary aggressors, were decimated, over a quarter of their population killed or enslaved. Many fled to Florida, seeking refuge with the Spanish in St. Augustine. Meanwhile, South Carolina's reliance on the Indian slave trade. This shift only redirected the colony's exploitation toward African slavery, paving the way for the plantation economy to thrive. The Yamasee War, one of colonial America's deadliest conflicts, underscored the precariousness of frontier life and the fragile relationships between settlers and indigenous peoples. It also revealed the settlers' short-sightedness. While they survived their refusal to address the underlying causes of conflict, only ensured the cycle of exploitation and violence continued. History's lessons, it seems, are often learned too late or not at all.